welcome along to this afternoon's session on 10 things that are going to make your life easier as a DBA. One of the things I enjoy about being a consultant is the opportunity to go out and talk to people from various different customers in various different verticals. And one of the things that I find time and time again when talking to a DBA is we really don't have a lot of time on our hands. We're really down there in the trenches. We're focusing on a lot of the business as usual work. And as a result, we don't have an opportunity to go out there and go and play with some of the new, nice, shiny things. We don't get to play with some of the new technology that's coming down the pipeline. And we don't have enough capacity to really get down deep and actually look at what is it that's causing all of our pain points inside of the organisation, and how do we go and resolve those pain points in order to really make our life easier, free up our time, and really get then to be able to go and play with some of the shiny things. So what we're going to do in today's presentation, it's going to be a little bit different to some of the presentations you've probably been to already. We want to make this very interactive because we want to involve you guys and get your feedback. Because as DBAs, you've all got very different experiences. Because what we want to do today is we want to go and share with you what Dave and I think are actually the top 10 best things to actually make your life easier. And really as we go through each of the points, just to get some feedback and really get some interaction as we talk about those as we walk through each of those points. So my name is Peter Ward, and I'm the Chief Technical Architect for Ward IT Solutions, SQL Server consulting and training company based over in Brisbane in Australia. I'm an MVP, and I'm also a Microsoft Virtual TSP as well. And my colleague on stage here today is Dave Dustin.
Right, my name's Dave Dustin. I'm a SQL Server Administrator for Wolters Kluwer, a publishing company based in the US with New Zealand offices. I'm also a SQL Server MVP like Peter. I'm the founder of the Auckland SQL Server User Group and a committee member for MS Communities, the umbrella organisation for all Microsoft technology-based user groups in New Zealand. So, quick breakdown of the agenda we're looking at today. 10 things. We're going to work from left down, then right down. So, kicking off with baselines. Knowing what you're working with. Even if you're an established DBA or you're a DBA coming into a new environment or you've been handed a new server, the first thing you need to know is what are you dealing with? What have you got on your system? Who's using it? What the data is? And how is it performing? How is it configured? You need to inspect your systems. You need to document what's there and identify who owns this information, who owns the server, who is the business owner for the whole environment.
So I think the big thing with baselines really is what we're trying to say is what have we got now versus what we had in the future? What's changed in that particular environment? So does anybody have any tips or tricks that they'd like to share that they use to be able to take a snapshot of their environments that allows them to then look at it now versus where it was in the past? So one of the tools that I use time and time again when I go into an organisation is the Best Practices Analyzer. What the Best Practices Analyzer allows me to do is the 2008 R2 version just got released, RTM, on Sunday night, so there's now a BPA available for R2 as well. But what the Best Practices Analyzer allows me to do is go and really look at those best practices that I should be running. So things such as I don't have my data file sitting on the same drive as my log file, looks at memory configuration. And what it allows me to do is take a snapshot of each of these configurations. It stores them inside of a SQL database. I can run a report on them. But what I can more importantly do is I can then go and do a delta, which allows me to go and look at this is how it was now. This is how it is now. So sorry, this is how it was then, this is how it was now. Because often when we're working with in an organisation, various changes are happening to that environment. And as a DBA, I really want to be able to get exposed to those and have a really clear indication of what's changed. And the other thing that we also, Dave, briefly touched on there from a baselining perspective is also around performance. Because what we want to be able to do is monitor the performance of that server over time. In other words, capacity planning. Because as DBAs, often what happens is we'll get a senior IT executive that comes to us and they'll say to us, how much storage space are we going to need in 18 months' time? And the reason that they ask that question so far in advance is often capital expenditure, also known as CapEx, is done that far in advance. So to make sure that we've got the budget, we need to then forecast that out. So as DBAs, often one of the things that I see is what we do when we need to guess how much storage space is, put our finger up into the wind, take a guess at a number and then go and double it just to be sure. But really that performance, not only just from a sizing perspective, but also it easily allows us to identify what the footprint or how that application actually behaves over time. So is anybody using any particular tools that they find really useful for measuring performance? So one of the tools that I use all the time is my good friend Perfmon, because what Perfmon allows me to do is go and capture a baseline of what my service and what the performance is, and then look at that over time. So I then know what the expected behaviour of a server is. So the next thing that's probably really important is documentation, and we all know and love documentation, don't we? You can see everybody nodding in the crowd here. But I want to tell you a little story. Now, I actually used to work for a very, very large retailer. I used to be responsible for 3,500 SQL Server instances, so that was my baby. I was actually the escalation manager there, meaning if the guys that were actually on frontline SQL Server support did not respond to that page, it would get escalated through to me. I was also then an escalation point from a technical perspective as well. But look, I had a really good bunch of guys that we were working with in that particular team, and look, I hadn't been escalated to for around about 3 months. So I was at a mate's birthday party, and at the birthday party there was a keg. So look, one of the things obviously about being on call is normally you're supposed to sort of steer clear of alcohol, but there happened to be a keg there. So the story goes, whether it's true or not, but about 3 o'clock in the morning, apparently I was in the pool. Apparently there wasn't a lot of clothing on, but I was actually very diligent. I actually had the pager sitting next to me on the side of the pool. All of a sudden at 3 a.m. in the morning, this thing goes buzzing across the side of the pool. I picked it up and I looked at it again. There was no way I was going to be able to respond to that. Thankfully, my lovely wife was actually at that party with me. Now, my wife's an artist, so turning a computer on is actually a big event for her. So she's really proud when she can actually turn it on without asking me. And what happened was we actually needed to go and do a database restore. We actually had an entire server offline. The ops team had actually rebuilt from scratch. We had to go back from backups to bring those back. So in my inebriated state, I was able to sort of go, there's a document on the desktop. And that document on the desktop was how to go and perform a database restore. Now what she was able to do is she was able to then not only respond to that page, but step by step, step 1, this is how we do this, step 2, step 3. And this is what we want from a documentation point of view, and this is why it's so important. Because things such as the restore happening, they don't happen on a Wednesday morning after I've had 2 cups of coffee. They're typically very, very late at night in the wee hours of the morning. And what I want to be able to do is really have a checklist process that I can actually run through, so step by step. So that's what we want to get all of our documentation to. But what it also means for a DBA, having that level of documentation, it means that I can comfortably go on holidays. I don't have to have the mobile phone turned on all of the time, because what I've done is produced an effective handover documentation. So what documentation is really important, because what it also does is it means that we've got a consistent way of approaching something as well. So we standardise and everyone in our organisation is following exactly the same steps. So does anyone have any tips or tricks that they use around documentation to make their life easy? Because I know it's the bane of my existence as a consultant, having to spend most of my life inside of Microsoft Word. Yeah? Yeah, versioning control of the documentation, that's really important, because obviously we want to make sure we're looking at the right version, we're not looking at something that's out of date. So, yeah. Templates, yeah, document templates, that way we're always, the same way that we want to write our code in a consistent manner, also writing our documents in a consistent manner. So that way it makes it very easy for somebody else to go and find information inside of that document. So,
one of the most important things is make sure that your documentation is kept up to date. So if you upgrade a server and you migrate your databases across, make sure you update all of your relevant information about that new server, what's changed, and harking back to the previous slide, rerun your baselines. Whenever you change aspects of your environment, make sure that your baselines and the appropriate documentation are also updated. Now, documentation is also incredibly important if your organisation is going for auditing, is being audited, or you're going for certification, such as SAS or ISO or one of the other many enterprise standards. These processes require intricate documentation, as Peter was saying, step by step. You need to be able to reproduce the same thing over and over again, or, and as he stated, hand it over to somebody else that's not a professional DBA. They should be able to step through these things. Now, there will be some things that a non-DBA cannot do, but the documentation should be there to help and it should be an important resource and the first call of information if you need it. What SA passwords? No. So password security, things like credential security, make use of credential stores. So there are third-party packages, password safe, crypto key. There's a number of them. Store them in there. Make sure you use a very strong password to get into those. For things like SA, if you don't need it, then if you're using Windows integrated authentication across your environment, then set SA to an incredibly complex thing. Just mash your fingers on the keyboard and then disable the account so that somebody can't turn it back on and log in as SA for any reason like that.
So the whole SA point actually brings us really into this whole backup as well, because one of the things with all of our passwords, and even in putting them inside of some sort of encryption process or some third-party tool, is we also need to make sure that we back those up and then make them available off-site. So in the event that we actually do have a true DR where the entire building burns down, how do we actually make sure that we've got all of that information that's then available to us? So that includes all of our documentation as well, because we want to make sure that we've got that restore process not only on-site but also off-site as well and accessible, so that if we needed to actually get woken up in the middle of the night, go off into the cold standby site and bring that up, we've got all of that information. Which
What if you're hit by a bus and you're the only person who knows the password, the encryption password?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So the question is what happens if you're the only person that knows the password and you actually get hit by a bus? Typically what we do with organisations is also actually have that inside of a fireproof safe somewhere off in the DR site somewhere. So in the event that somebody does need to get that, there will be somebody else in the organisation that will have a key combination to be able to get access to that safe in order to then go and get all of that information.
There should be absolutely no reason for any enterprise to have only one person that has knowledge of a particular security credential. Even if you are the enterprise admin for a business, put your EA password, as long as it doesn't change every 42 days or something like that, on a piece of paper, give it to the CFO to put into the financial data, the financial file safe. So he can't make use of it, but if anything happens, he can pass it on to, say, the CTO or the appropriate person to pick up. There was somebody starting to ask a question down there. SP Help Rev Login? What about it? It should be part of your baseline audits. We'll cover some of the things right at the end is about scripting and tools and things like that. But yeah, SP Rev Login, for those that don't know, so a store procedure that will iterate through your the credentials and the logins for your particular for a server, and will dump them out. It doesn't dump out the passwords, and well, it will in a sense, but they are encrypted, and that you can't reverse engineer the password out of that. Yes, yes, you can. So, going back to backups. You may have the most wonderful backup plan in the world, but if you don't test whether or not that backup can be restored either to a like server or to a similarly configured server, then you cannot guarantee that in a disaster or in the situation where you need to roll back due to user error or administrator error, such as delete clause with no where statement, then you basically need to update your CV and start looking for,
I saw a couple of chuckles actually over there about the delete with the where clause, and my first night on call as a DBA, that's exactly what I did. So I was actually working for an organisation. I thought I was pretty good. I was now on call, and I'd moved up the ranks. And so I got in there, and there's actually a problem with this organisation's stock take. So basically this stock take had been a 5-day process. All of these temporary staff had come in, so a big cost to the organisation. Got to the last point of the stock take and they couldn't actually commit the stock take, and did a little bit of investigation, and I found out there was an erroneous record that had actually gone in there. So this was in the early days of the PDT scanners where people were scanning in. So what had happened is basically a special character had gone in there. So I called up the development support team and said, look, this is what I found. And they said, oh, don't worry about it. It's not going to make a difference. Just delete that record. So as a DBA, what do you think I did? Delete from table where, 1 a.m. in the morning, forgot the where clause. But thankfully, I'd actually gone and taken a backup prior to actually doing that. So I was able to then, it's taking a little bit longer than I expected, and be able to then go and recover and bring that back online. But the interesting point around backups is this whole concept of a fire drill. Now, if you think about your own organisations and what the HR department does, the HR department has legislated that every 6 months throughout the year, they need to go and do a mock evacuation. So that's where they'll get the fire alarms, go whoop, whoop, whoop. Everyone evacuates the building. We go and make sure we know where the evacuation point is. So really that's a governance process that they need to go through from an organisational level. We actually as DBAs should be going through that same governance and having those same fire drills. Because what the fire drill allows us to do is it allows us to go and clearly test our end-to-end process, and then what it allows us to do is identify any gaps that we might have in them, document and fix those gaps so that next time when we do have a fire drill, we can go and retest that again. And it's exactly the same way that somebody needs to know how to exit the building, somebody also then needs to easily know how to then restore from the backup. Because as Dave said, a backup is never actually completed until you've been able to successfully restore from it.
And further to that, if you ever get a free half day or something like that, request from your backup administrator, say, I'd like a copy of the database dump from July 2007. I need to test that the backups are working. Do that every once in a while. Keep them on their toes. May cost the company a little bit of money to pull from the storage, but that way you can guarantee that, okay, we've changed our backup systems in the last 18 months. Can we still read this old information? What happens if we get audited? We need to be able to access data 7 to 10 years old. If you can't do that, then you've got a serious problem.
One of the things that we found that works really well internally is we actually, being a couple of DBAs, there's 17 of us, we get a little bit excited when we all get together. So we have little competitions where somebody will break something and then somebody else has then got to recover from that. Because what that also does is it really stretches each of us individually. So for example, what would happen if we had a particular corrupt page? So rather than the entire database being corrupted was just one page, how do we recover from that? How do we recover from various different scenarios? So maybe it's just the log that's gone offline and the data file is still actually intact. And the way that we incentivise the guys basically is one person breaks it, the other one's got to fix it. If the person can't fix it, then they've got to go and buy beers for the other person. So a little bit of competition between it. But what it means is you're really keeping very, very sharp and it allows you to actually be prepared for those scenarios that you may not have thought about previously. And really making sure that that end-to-end backup and restore routine is very, very tight. So has anybody got any tips or tricks that they'd like to share that they do in their own organisation just to make sure that their backup process is 100%? Yep. Yeah, great point. Actually making sure it's actually what we're backing up is actually a good fit. Obviously on very large databases, so multi-terabyte databases, that's always not an option, not always an option. So one of the things there is to go and restore that onto then a separate machine and then go and run your integrity checks on that other machine. So you can actually then let those go and run there.
What's behind the verify backup? You should always turn verify backup on because if anything happens with it's more important if you're writing direct to tape, less so these days where you're writing to magnetic media, but it is still very important because what that will do is it will go back through and verify the checksums from the page of your database with the page on the database file. So make sure that you haven't had any bit flips while the data is being written out. Yeah.
If I turn on verify, I have a suspicion it won't be finished before the next 40.
So is that a technical term that I haven't heard before about how long a backup takes? No, and that's what we were saying before. In your very large databases, really what you want to do is you want to get your backup completed as quickly as possible, get it off somewhere else, restore it on there and verify it in that particular location there. So.
You've also got options like backup compression, which will reduce the amount of time taken due to the less I/O that needs to be written out.
If I didn't have compression, it would take all night.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So that's a really interesting point around backups, and I know we're sort of spending a bit of time on here, but really, if you think about the role of a DBA, the role of a DBA is a data custodian. We're responsible for maintaining the integrity of that data in the organisation. So with our backups, we also need to think, do we need to go and back up the entire database? Can we actually go and maybe use some of the technology to actually go and read-write file groups? So where some of my file groups have actually got archive data on there. If that archive data hasn't changed, then I don't need to go and back up that file group that's only read-only. I only need to go and back up the write parts. And we can do that with partitioning as well. So when we've got very large databases, we need to start to think about how do we not only manage the data, but how do we go about managing those backups as well. So a number of techniques, and read-write file groups is a great way to do that, because what it allows us to do is do our backup routine, and then if we go and change a file group to read-only, it will only then go and back up the file groups that are actually write active. So the question was, what are we going to do about our good old tape drives, and how do we actually go and manage with those? So look, realistically, what we're seeing with a lot of organisations, especially with SAN storage, is where what they'll actually do with the backups is they'll actually go and split the mirror. So they'll actually split the mirror on the SAN and then geo-replicate that somewhere else. And then what that allows you to do is get that off-site backup component. Tape drives are still great because the cost per megabyte is so low for an organisation, rather than actually even tier 2. They're a lot cheaper than even tier 2 storage. So they're not going to go away, but a lot of organisations, especially in that larger database, are looking for other things that they can actually do at the SAN level. So unfortunately, I don't think they're going to go away anytime soon, especially with some of the big tape hoppers that we're seeing with some organisations that they're using to go and do all their backups and the striping across those. So I don't think they're going to go away, but I think SAN replication is certainly a good option around that.
Does that answer your question? Or so you're thinking more along the lines of what happens when you upgrade to new, say you go from DLT1 to DLT2 and stuff like that. Keep your old drives around if possible for as long as you need to keep access to your data, or make sure you can find a vendor, a backup company that can perhaps lease or provide you access to that recovery medium when necessary. So you can say, here's a tape, please dump it onto this, this newer version of the tape. There are companies out there that will actually do tape upgrades. I don't know about the legitimacy with regards to archival certification. So if you take a 7-year-old tape and upgrade it to the latest tape, is that still counted as 7-year-old data, or has it been changed? It's something that would need to be verified.
What's the data integrity for an old tape? Tapes degrade, don't they?
Yes, they do. So that's why I'm saying do things like, okay, we need to pull the tape from July 2007, 3 years old. Depending upon the type of tape, it has between a 5 and 10 year expected life, which, so start asking for old tapes.
You have to move the tape onto the USB anyway.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying, is that there may also be, depending upon your organisation and your requirements, you may need to work with authorities to say, okay, we are upgrading our backup tape, but it's still the same media, it's still exactly the same information from what was written out at that point in time.
We use SAN replication, and our SAN died of replicating the error to our offsite backup, which killed that too, and the only thing that saved us was tape backups.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's actually a really good point, because if you think about where errors occur typically today in an organisation, the errors are not hardware. This one, in fact, was. But if you think about all of our HA technologies, such as mirroring and clustering, they're designed to go and take whatever happens over here on this side and go and apply it across to that side. So that delete without the where clause, it's then going to apply that delete around the where clause, which is why from our backup perspective, we also need to think about how do we do point-in-time recovery. So things like our transaction log backups and differential backups. What's the strategy that we put in place there in order to make sure that we don't go and lose an entire day's worth of data? How do we actually then get that incremental data back in place? So a really good point that the gentleman actually raised there.
And it also carries through with the point about verify as well. If you can't afford the time to run DBCC, CheckDB on your production environment, make sure you do periodically check your backups on another instance, because if you have a corrupt page in your production database, that corrupt page will carry through into the backups. Backup won't detect errors. Backup just copies the data that's in there. and puts it down into a dump file. So you need to verify it either in production or in a restored instance, because you could wind up 3 months later that a read-only file group is actually unreadable.
So the next thing we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about monitoring. And look, when we talk about monitoring, there's really a number of arrows that we've got inside of our quiver as a DBA that we can actually use. But really from a monitoring perspective, what we're really trying to actually do is get some governance about what's happening to our machines from a performance perspective over time. Now we spoke earlier on about what's happening from our configuration and how we take a snapshot, maybe using tools such as a BPA to go and do that. But what we also want to be able to do is look at that performance trend over time from a monitoring perspective. So we've got a number of different tools that are available to us. We've got things such as System Center Operation Manager or SCOM. Or what I find working with a number of DBAs is often what they do is they take this hybrid mix of all of these tools, such as looking at the DMVs, pulling information out of perfmon, and they'll actually roll their own monitoring solution out there. Has anybody got anything that they want to share with us? Maybe something that they've thought that's very funky and very cool that they're doing in their organisation with monitoring? So obviously one of the big things around our DMVs is the fact that they're only as good as the last time the SQL Server instance was stopped and restarted. So one of the things we want to get into the habit of is capturing that information so that we can then look at it over time. Because there's some valuable things that we can pull out of that. So for example, we can then go and look at what was the execution plan that was used by a particular query and why has that execution plan have changed. In fact, I was actually doing some work this morning sitting in the hotel, exactly that, looking at the execution plan and why had it actually changed. So previously this query ran in less than a second, now it was all of a sudden running in 19 seconds. So being able to look back through the DMVs, I could actually go and see that that execution plan had changed for that particular query. And the reason that had happened was there was a change to the index structure that somebody had made, and as a result the execution plan was now behaving differently to what it had in the past.
And following on from monitoring, reporting. Big way to waste your time in the morning is to run all of these reports manually. So what you want to do is have the information delivered to you either via email or have consolidated reports, so have things that are pre-scripted and ready to run, or using third-party packages so that you can sit down in the morning while you're drinking your coffee, you can look through the reports, look through your email, see what's happened. One of the key ones is, if something worked fine, do you really need to know about it? Do you need to know that the backups work? Do you need to know that the backups were verified correctly? No, you need to know if something went wrong.
I would just like to say that knowing that your backups have actually successfully completed is worth knowing.
Yes, but do you need it as your first line reporting?
Absolutely. It doesn't run at all.
Yeah, that's a different. Yeah, there's a difference between did all the jobs run versus did the backups.
You can set up reporting by exception,
Yeah.
but you still need a heartbeat. And the most important heartbeat in my book is the backup. So I still get a backup, a thing that says your backup has completed, even though anything else could be reported by exception. That's still a good one to know, because you still need to know that your reporting and your agent is running. Because if it isn't, and you don't hear anything, your system could be dead and you won't know.
Yeah, I'd actually agree, and I think what Dave was really trying to say around that point, and maybe backups wasn't the best example to go and use that, is often you'll come in from work in the morning, you'll have 3,500 emails sitting inside of your inbox from all of the alerts that have happened overnight. How do you actually then go and filter the signal to noise ratio and actually identify where the real noise is coming from? So I think, as we said before, backups are very, very critical inside of an organisation, and knowing that the backup has succeeded is certainly something that you want to know. One of the other things is you want to probably start to capture around all of these jobs is somewhere in the background what the duration of these jobs is over time, so that you can actually start to extrapolate, because often what we'll have, for example, in a backup is a window that we need to complete that backup in. So am I getting close to the maximum window that I've got? What strategies can I then put in place to actually make sure that I don't exceed that? But really what we're trying to do with all of this reporting is really minimise the signal to noise ratio. So only get alerted about those key alerts rather than the success messages for everything. And when we do get alerts, how do we consolidate them? So rather than having 3,500 emails, maybe we just get one email that's actually then got the exceptions at the top. So the traffic light scenario where what we might have is all the alerts that are in red at the top, then things that we can look at later in the day in orange further down the report. And if we want to scroll down to the bottom, we've then got all of our success status messages down the bottom. But really from a DBA's perspective, make it very easy for us to actually identify what we need to look at straight away. As soon as we rock in at 8 o'clock in the morning, what is it that's an issue that we need to jump on top of? So has anybody got any tips and tricks that they're using for notification now? So maybe they're using DB Mail, maybe they've gone and wrote something themselves that they're doing that they're finding very effective that they want to share with everybody?
We've got a couple of pretty simple things. All of the reports and so forth coming out, we put keywords in them, like if it's something is a threshold is determined that there's an error.
Yep.
You put the word error or warning in it, and you use schema rules.
Yeah, great. So you can actually use your Outlook filter to actually then do all that hard work for you.
Oh, just
Yeah.
folders,
Yeah.
stuff that's the normal everyday that you most of the time don't even look at.
Yep.
Goes into subfolders, and the ones that are red,
Mhm.
alerts, they're in your place and change colour.
Yeah, great point.
Following on from that, those messages in the subfolder, do you read them?
Oh yeah.
Do you go in and check them?
Yeah, and you're more than likely you just glance through the headings to do it. Because some of them, you don't need to look at all the time because you're busy, but
Yeah. This is
they can multiple directories if you
Yeah.
want. Which is what I want.
Yeah. But that's one of the key things with the manage by exception is that if you come to the point where you are filtering these messages into subfolders and after a week you go in there and there's 7,000 messages all unread, do you really need to be being told those messages? I mean,
Some of them not, but some of them like to monitoring how long does this take.
yeah, absolutely.
But we did get rid of a lot of the stuff that was going in.
Yeah.
I think the gentleman up here had something.
Yeah, at a previous company I worked for, we put a lot of time building a very customizable monitoring engine in the CLR
Mhm.
because it performed a lot better than actually doing it in T-SQL scripts because there was a bit of number crunching, which SQL's not really in. So if you are watching the performance of your database as well, make use of the CLR.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
When I was talking about reporting by exception, that's basically what I do or did. And we used a stored procedure to send out the alert. So basically what I did is I modified the stored procedure so that it would look at, whenever when we send an alert, it would look at a table and basically say, okay, so this is a success alert, it fits within the window, I won't send it.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't fit in the window or if it's another sort of alert, it's send it. It makes a lot less change.
Yeah, so one of the other things that we've actually seen a number of customers do is almost this whole concept of self-diagnostics or self-healing. So that when, for example, a particular alert comes, rather than actually just firing an alert, because with an alert inside of SQL, you can kick off a job. So what they'll do is when that particular alert bubbles up, they know what the cause of that is. They'll then go and fire off a job that will then try and fix a problem. And then, for example, let's say our backup has failed because there hasn't been enough free space. So one of the things that they'll then do is look at, can I make that backup somewhere else just to get it successful backup, and then alert the DBA in the morning that we then need to go and do something about this. There's not enough space there. We need to go and make some more free space. So different things like that that we can do really, I suppose, to start to not only just alert, but see if we can start to move into that phase of self-healing. But the other thing with all of this is often what we find is around reporting, and this comes back to our monitoring in the last one as well. There's a number of third-party tools that are available out there. So we've got things like SCOM and that. So we need to be very careful that the time that we're investing inside of developing this monitoring reporting is not something that's already available out there. So definitely, certainly have a look at some of the other tools that are available to assist you with the alerting and reporting.
The other thing you need to consider is the categorization and the criticality of the information. Do you really need to know at 1 o'clock in the morning that a backup has failed, or do you need to know at 1 o'clock in the morning that a server has stopped responding? I think you can possibly worry about the backup failing when you get in at 8:30 or so, but the server being down at 1 o'clock in the morning, I think that's something you've got to crawl out of bed for. Providing you know, I mean, if you get notified that a backup has failed, if you know that you have previous good backups, then the chance of something happening at the same time, it would depend upon your configuration too. If you're using high availability, clustering, mirroring, SAN replication, some sort of other HA, then your stress levels probably can decrease at that point.
So the other thing that we've got is really this whole concept of management. And when we're talking about management, we're not talking about the executives that are out playing golf. What we're really talking about is how do we go about managing our environments, especially from a version control perspective. Because unfortunately in our organisations, we've got these people that are called developers, these pesky developers. And they actually like to deploy new versions across into our organisations. And the problem is how do we make sure that what we've actually applied is actually the latest version? I don't know how many times a developer has gone and thrown me a script and I've gone to run it and realised they haven't got a use statement at the top. So all of a sudden I'm going to have a whole heap of objects sitting inside my master database. And really, change for developers is actually very, very easy to manage. So change for a developer is simply just lobbing out a new executable. They don't need to worry about all of the existing executables. However, for a DBA, change is actually very hard because we actually need to deal with tables. So if I make a change to a table, I can't just drop that table. What I need to do is I actually have to manage all of the data that's inside of that. But one of the key things is actually how do I actually then go and make sure that I've actually got the correct version of that table? Is it the right version? Is it actually have I applied that schema change correctly so that I'm now up to the appropriate version? Has anybody got any tips or tricks that they're using today to manage all of that change inside of all of their database schemas to make sure that all of the objects are the correct versions?
Well, one of the things we do is we have development working on a database, and when it's ready to go into production, then we use Visual Studio database.
So Data-Dude?
Manage the schema across, and then we release the programs. So that way the schema in production is the same as the schema in development at that point.
So at that point in time, you're doing a delta between production and that development environment, and at that particular, syncing them up?
Now, it's a really cool thing, providing you've only got one project at a time going on. So that's where you need to perhaps consider, if you have the opportunity to work with schemas, you break the projects down so you're working within a particular schema, or you use some other methodology for just keeping track of what components belong to what particular projects. The difficulty is when you start dealing with common components, common tables, common security credentials, and common data. Because data migration as part of a release is also an incredibly critical thing. Adding another column into a table, what happens to all the other columns what happens to the other data that's already there, and will it have an impact on another application that perhaps uses that data? So if you're changing something that's common, you need to make sure that anything else that touches that table is also updated, or at least verified.
Visual Studio 2010 database projects.
Yep, so the data tier apps?
No, there is a separate project
yeah.
now for databases. I've started to use that one.
Yeah. That's an extension of what was previously called Data-Dude, or the Visual Studio Team System for Database Professionals. So that gives you functionality such as schema comparison, data comparison, and database projects. So you can actually break parts into smaller chunks. And yes, it is, from Professional Edition upward. There's also, in Standard Edition, there's limited functionality. For Professional, you get all of the bells and whistles.
It also has unit testing for databases.
I believe that's only an Ultimate.
Yeah, and static code analysis as well. So I think there was a... Oh, sorry?
Yep.
So a gatekeeping process that allows that change to get promoted between the environments.
We had a lot of problems with only 3 environments. So we've got 2 domains and 4 environments now. So that the
Could you talk a bit so that people don't can hear?
That's okay, we'll reiterate.
Yeah.
The developers sometimes, they try something which is fair enough, it's development what it's for. So the change data capture option just proved too difficult. So the first iteration had to be scripted or evolved from Visual Studio project. And once it was applied in one of the other environments, you could then use the other methods or just say that yes, the script is good. And we've also got to the point that you have demarcating projects by database. So the project wasn't allowed to happen because something was already approved. Because we've got the
Yeah. The methodology we actually use in the company I work for is that each developer has their own personal instance of the database. So they can make changes against that database themselves, but they can't make any changes to the shared instance of the development database, and they can't make any changes to production, QA, testing, anything like that. So that means that they can work on their own things, and everything gets channeled through the DBA resource for verification that nothing else is going to be impacted.
that proved difficult when we got this talk involved over a set of code.
Yeah.
They have different resources working on it.
Yeah.
Working on the same thing to prove that something's working. So
Yeah. So what we do is that we can basically just make regular deltas available as required. But yeah, it's something that needs to be worked out in individual organisations. The same thing isn't going to work for everybody.
So the other component of management is also this whole concept of patch management. So do I actually go apply cumulative updates, or I just apply service packs, or how do I actually then make sure that all of my environments are at a consistent build level? Or do I then go and have exceptions because for a particular environment that application is only supported on that version and we can't go and update that? So has anybody got any strategies in place that they're using around the deployment of cumulative updates or CUs and service packs at the moment?
Don't forget Windows updates as well. You need to work with the infrastructure guys. So
I'd love to do a quick straw poll. Who here's applying cumulative updates? Who here's waiting for the service pack?
depends on the environment.
And the rest of you guys aren't doing anything.
are you guys aware of what cumulative updates are? So cumulative updates are basically halfway between a hotfix and a service pack. So Microsoft every 45 days bundles up all of the hotfixes for a particular product into a cumulative update. So it undergoes a more rigorous testing than a normal hotfix would, but not quite the same level of regression testing that a service pack would. The idea is that it's to prevent breaking changes occurring from a later hotfix that may have hidden or impact on or rely on an issue that was resolved with an earlier hotfix. Recommended best practice these days, if you don't have a standardized server build, is actually to build with the most recent service pack, and if you're some recommended best practice is latest service pack and the latest cumulative update, so that on a new instance only, if it is a new environment. If you're building another box to match, for say a SQL farm, your instances should all be exactly the same. You don't want to have mixed configuration levels, patch levels. Automation. You've got a nice, powerful machine. It's got incredibly powerful functionality for automating a lot of things. You've got the SQL agent. You've got task scheduler. You can make for automating your jobs. There's other third-party scheduling tasks. Making use of SMO, making use of PowerShell, making use of pre-written scripts. Basically, you can get all of these things and have them run on a schedule as required, and have the results delivered to you, or just perform. Sorry.
So the other thing, and automation is actually really cool, because one of the things we've actually done with one of our customers is around PowerShell. So who here is familiar with SCCM, so System Center Config Manager? So System Center Config Manager allows you to automatically go and procure a new Windows box. So basically it's a tool, right-click, all of a sudden you get automatically a new Windows box. Up until R2, we weren't able to do that because R2 has only first introduced sysprep for SQL. So prior to that, what we would do is we'd actually wrap the entire install of SQL inside of a PowerShell script. What that would mean is that as part of that procurement process, they could also automatically even procure the entire cluster. So simply right-click SCCM, new SQL cluster, bang, 15 minutes later they'd have a cluster. But the advantage of actually wrapping that install inside of PowerShell is it means that we had a consistent install every single time. So every time we installed a new machine, it would look, smell and feel exactly like that previous machine. So we could bundle in all of our standard maintenance plans in there, all of the configurations that we wanted, and it meant that all of those machines were identical. Question? Yeah, so with PowerShell, it's just a config that you actually say what are the post-installation tasks that are being performed, and that allows you to actually specify what you want to do post after that. So one of the things is service packing and applying a CU. But one of the things too is I come from a background where I was responsible for managing 3,500 SQL instances. How the heck do you actually go out there and actually get a snapshot of how all of those look at one particular point in time? You can't really open up Management Studio and go right-click properties through all of them. So by using a tool such as SMO, so SMO is really what Management Studio is built on, we can now call that from PowerShell and then traverse all of that information. So we can go out there and actually go and say, give me the size of all of my data files, bring all of that information then back to us. And realistically, to write something like that is about 4 lines of PowerShell in order for you to write. And you might be saying, well, look, I don't want to go and learn a new scripting language. Well, PowerShell's not really new. It's really taken the best of a number of scripting languages, so the best of VBScript, it's taken the best from Corn Shell, and really brought all of those together to create an object-oriented scripting language that we can then go and use. So something definitely to add into your arsenal as a DBA is the ability to then go and write PowerShell, because one of the things you would have noticed inside of 2008 and above is you can, when you right-click on an object, you can actually fire a PowerShell window up at exactly that point. So very simply, what that would mean is if I was to right-click, open up PowerShell on my database, let's go on tables, I can then go dir from that point, so the same way that I do a directory listing, or ls if I'm a Linux or Unix guy, and that would allow me to then go and list all of those tables that are sitting beneath there. So pretty powerful scripting that we can do, but really allows us to automate a lot of those mundane processes that we do day in, day out. Because really what we're trying to drive with a lot of this automation and also removing the manual processes is really freeing up us to have some time to really get hot and horny with performance tuning, get under the covers, and also get an opportunity to then go and play with some of the nice new shiny things that are coming down the pipeline as well.
And also, if you have an existing repository of SQL scripts, that doesn't moving to PowerShell doesn't necessarily mean you need to rewrite everything, because you can make use of the PowerShell functionality to launch those scripts against a set of objects. So if you have a set of scripts which you use to verify all of the databases on a system, you can use PowerShell to launch those scripts against the loop of all of the servers or databases or tables, any objects as necessary.
So the next thing we're going to have a look at is we're going to have a look at change tracking, and that's really being able to have a look at what's happened over time. And really this has really, I suppose, been improved with 2008 with the introduction of auditing, because we're now easily able to see who did what, when they did it, and what they did. So if anybody's got to go through any sort of compliance, such as a HIPAA compliance or maybe SOX compliance, this is actually very important, because one of the things is you need the ability to be able to show who did what at what particular point in time. But that it can be extended to not just include just audit and actions and who's actually completed it, but the other thing that we need to also keep a log of under those regulations is what changes have occurred and who made them. But what were they a part of? So what application change was that part of? And then having that change management process around that. Because look, I've worked with change management for a long point of time. And realistically, my attitude around change management is it's the whole care principle. And the reason I call it the care principle is it's because cover, retain, employment. So you can imagine what the A stands for there. So really what I want to do is every time I'm going to make a change, I want to raise a change request and I want to tell somebody that there's a risk involved in it. I don't care how small that change is, because the reason is I want to pass the onus off onto somebody else. They signed off on that change request. If something goes wrong, I've done the right thing, guys, I told you there was a risk, you signed off on it, I'm just going to have to fix it now. So really applying that care principle to all of your change processes, because very, very important, because we actually provide visibility, especially as data custodians for all of our data. So has anybody got any tips and tricks that they're using around auditing or maybe change control in their environments? Change control, you guys are saying, what's that? Yeah. Sorry? Don't use a particular vendor's product, okay? Yeah.
There's also more to change control and source control than just what your schema, your DDL. Also consider logging your DML. So the stuff that you do, your ad hoc queries that you perform, you get a help desk ticket saying, okay, I've accidentally entered the wrong value into this field and I can't edit it within the tool. Can you please correct this? Write that down. Put a note of what you did and why you did it, so that if you accidentally do something or you do something and then somebody else queries it a couple of days later, you can look back and say, okay, the reason this changed is because I did this.
And a really cool thing that we came across, so like typically when I make a change, I like to document what I'm doing. And we're recently working with a particular customer who had a dev team based out of France. We then had another team that was coming in out of Canada, and we had ourselves based out of Australia working through the night on this particular change. So what we're doing is taking a large website, moving it from one site to another. And what we actually did during that is we actually opened up an IM window, an instant messenger window, and every time we did something, we'd simply just type it into there. So at the end of it, we actually then had an entire track of everything that we'd actually done throughout the entire night. So we simply just took the contents of that IM window, pasted it straight into the change request, and that was then a log of everything that would actually then gone and completed. So it's something that I've never done before, but I actually thought that that was actually a really cool way of doing it, because I'm having this conversation with this person at the time, telling them what I'm doing, but self-documenting the entire end-to-end process around that. And look, certainly they weren't very verbose notes, but there's certainly enough information in there to actually let the person know what exactly it was that we had done during that period.
Database I've worked on, they use high-level triggers to actually stop completely the running of all ad hoc SQL, and that any change you did on the system had to be done with the stored proc, and the stored proc had to be configured whether it was a one-run or run once or a multi-run. So you had a template, and if it was a run once, it had to log into a database and a table to I've already run, I can't run again.
Yeah, that's a great idea, actually. Yeah. That's why it's good to get a lot of DBAs in a room, because it really gives us an opportunity to sort of look at how other people have done things and really just get a little bit of insight, because often I think we work in our own organisations and unfortunately we don't really get that opportunity to take the blinkers off to see what other people are doing. So for example, the idea up here about actually using, for example, DML triggers, fantastic idea that you might be able to use. The other thing we want to talk about is really this whole concept of reduce, reuse and recycle.
So many of us are performing ad hoc queries on a regular basis. You get a request through, okay, I need a quick report based on, just this block of information. But as we all know, there's no such thing as a one-off request. Somebody's going to ask you to run this thing again. So a really good idea is every time you write something, you don't start your query with a blank page. Start it with a query template, so you can actually put some information about, okay, why am I writing this query? When am I writing it? And save that out. Put it into a repository. Categorize it. So if this is a report, or if this is a data change, or if this is, modifying a user, categorize your information as you put it out onto the disk, because you never know when you're going to need it again. Or if you move to a new job, you can take those scripts with you, so you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You don't need to write the stuff again. You've already done the work. And there are excellent third-party repositories out there and people have already done a lot of these sorts of things. So writing a query to go through your database and find all of the tables that are missing indexes using the missing index DMVs, or find indexes that haven't been touched, or they're read-only indexes, so they're never being updated. Is there any value in having this there, or is it only being written to? So I highly recommend that you investigate things like that. There's websites like Sequelpedia, who have incredibly useful videos, scripts. Codeplex, other groups have all got similar sorts of scripts. The other thing is snippets, code fragments. So how many times do we need to write a cursor or create a new trigger or something like that. Sure, there's the templates, but it's incredibly slow bringing that up. Maybe you've got your own methodology for just dragging a snippet in from, you start off with a default project. You can drag the bit in, reuse that.
And that really brings us on to the whole, what we're trying to say here is really a lot of people have done this work before, and there's a lot of third-party tools available, third-party websites and vendors. So rather than reinventing the wheel, maybe just spend a little bit of time with your search engine of choice, having a look at what's available out there. So what tools has somebody else written? Because realistically, if you're spending a little bit of time on Bing, and I'm sure by the end of it, you're actually going to find someone that's done it. Or if they haven't, it's going to get you 90% of the way there, and you then need to just go and modify that. So folks, before we look to wrap up this afternoon, has anybody got any other tips and tricks that maybe they've thought of that they'd really like to share with the audience this afternoon? Yeah, great recommendation there. So folks, that really brings us to the end of where we wanted to get to this afternoon. So really what we wanted to share with you is the opportunity to get a little bit of interactivity, find out what other DBAs are doing throughout New Zealand and how they're dealing with some of the same challenges that you've done. Hopefully you've got a couple of little takeaways or a couple of little snippets that you can take away that's just going to make your life easier as a DBA and give you the opportunity to have a look at some of the new stuff coming down the pipeline. So folks, once again, thank you very much for this afternoon. Don't forget to fill out your evaluation forms. And if anybody's got any further questions, we'll just be outside after the session. So thanks, guys.
If anybody's interested in hanging out, it's designed to make it's designed to make your life as a DBA a lot better. Called Scripts Manager from the company Redgate. It is due to be released within the next 3 months, and it will be a free tool. It is designed to templatize and work with a script library, a personal script library. So out of the box it comes with 20 at the moment, and it's going to be extended to over 60 new scripts by the time it actually gets ready for release. So the information is categorized. So we've got a whole pile of scripts here. So if we go down to backup, so there we go. We can quickly, easily see all the last run, last time the databases were run, export that to CSV as required. So show all the database sizes on an instance. Yes, it's from Redgate. So it's not available. You can't even get onto the beta at the moment. In fact, most people in the world don't even know this thing exists. So you guys are incredibly privileged. So, and yeah, it's something that I highly recommend keeping the ear out for. The other thing that I'd recommend doing is getting involved in the SQL community. So there's an incredibly powerful SQL community out there. Forums, Twitter, mailing lists, discussion groups, incredibly knowledgeable people, and well worth the time and effort involved in it. Thank you.